But anyway, it's time for the next presentation, which is Kurt Stahler, who is Chief Technical Officer at Siemens Healthcare. And let's see how these two things connect.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Jan, and thank you for listening. I'll try to connect to the points Jan made here in his presentation as good as I can. Let's see. Is it the right direction? Yes. I thought maybe already when he was talking about various molecules and cells and things you can measure, I always love that slide to start on the innovation piece of my talk, but later I'm really coming to the commercial aspects of what we're doing in healthcare. But the whole world we work in is shown here. And I always find it's the fun thing, that's all there is. It's a very few, very discrete elements. Everything is made up. So while you all sit here, you're an individual human being. And you're all set up by just a few organ systems. And all these organ systems making you up are made of cells. That's all there is. Every organ is just formed by a bunch of cells. And you think about the cells, they're all made up, mainly their structure, by proteins. And there's nothing else. And proteins themselves are just made up by 21 sorts of molecules. 21 amino acids. That's all there is. These amino acids form chains. These chains form a three-dimensional structure, and clustering of these structures is all there is. 21, imagine, forming all the cells, and then on top of that they're loaded with compounds. We count today 2,500. That's things which you naturally know. That's metals, that's whatever, salt, and things like that, which we can measure. In the healthcare piece of it, that is the piece we call clinical chemistry. That is probably called amino acids. In both of these, we roughly measure a good 200 of these, seem to be relevant, and we can connect them to health and disease. Same on this level. And the description how a cell produces proteins to reproduce itself, to form organs, to form you, form us, is all down here in this coding piece, in our genes. And these are even simpler. It's sugar, just the same thing as always as you put in your coffee every morning. And it has just four subversions of it, with very slight differentiation. But that whole thing, so only 4 building blocks, is able to copy information. So that whole apparatus can copy information, all the way up, that we sit here and think about it. So if you think how, on the one side, beautiful and simple the system is, and on the other side, how powerful it is when we sit here and discuss it. Just one thing, when you all started as a single cell, right, it took someone just 40 weeks and 45 cycles, so a little less than 1 week, to divide in every 6 days, and you were ready for birth. Just imagine. So we could start it all out of one cell. Another fine experiment, I think, and thinking you can make when you look at these numbers is that you immediately see that you have here a factor of 10,000 or more, which would mean if all the cells in your body would be of the same size, and I would divide the Earth's population by the number of cells every one of us has sitting here, there's a huge difference. So if it would be the same size, these egg cells of which human mankind today derived would be just a few grams. Now, cells can be different in size, so the cells we start with are on the bigger end, and there are smaller ones. But you only have to correct it by a factor of 10 to 100, which still means all the egg cells of all human beings living today, which theoretically could re-evolve to us in, as I said, 40 weeks, is less than a kilo for sure. So I can put all that complexity of human mankind on a single cell level where we could start off. Definitely on my hand. Others say it just needs the cell and all the differentiation would be down here. I doubt that, but even if that's true, then we could take the DNA of Dieter into my starting cell and get a Dieter, and not a crossover. No one ever did that. To a certain extent, we tried in an animal experiment, but never did that myself. But if that would be true, it's even harder than that. Then diversity of human mankind can't be seen by the unweaponed eye. Because then you need one of these cells, where Jan described what we can now do and start to measure them individually. But the information content on the genetic level is so condensed and in there that taking the genomes of all human beings all together with one cell is, you can't see it. So when everyone else ever says that our system has things like chunk DNA and all that, you take these numbers, I would always say, forget it. This is such a beautiful system made up here. I think it's wherever we explore it, we think about simple solutions. No. And that is the universe also we try to navigate in as Siemens Healthcare. This piece here is the in vitro diagnostics, where you kind of do lab tests. A lot of what Jan described could happen in the future. On the other hand, in vivo, when we come from the outside, the image, we take pictures of you, we drive it forward and forward. And somewhere probably in the centerpiece is the human cell, or cells in itself, with all its capabilities, including reproduction, which is the foundation of life. This said, I want to contrast something also to get across understanding to the colleagues from DTU. We as healthcare, we solely serve the clinical market. So that whole environment I described is a fundamental thing for us to understand where to navigate. But when we formulate products for that. And here, my little video clip died, so I took a picture version. And that is just an animation, a nice one with a few other things, showing what does it mean. Healthcare means that something clogs up your wing. And the healthcare system does something. In ours, or it's not an issue anymore, because you're gone. And there's a very different mindset that these kind of procedures and these kind of products is where healthcare is dedicated to. So we're interested also together with you to understand the science, to make the right decision, to know what's coming, where we can do something, but definitely only an avenue to those products which really help. But that also has another one, because that also means that you get a very rigid framework. Because we all here are going to be sooner or later in one or the other. I think probably every third of us at least will have that issue. You want to be absolutely sure that those people who treat you and touch your life get it right. That they make thorough testing, that they have the statistics right, that they not easily make a failure. That is needed, and the more we dig into the complexity I tried to describe, the harder society we have it to deal with how to get safety, how to regulate it well. We don't want to hinder innovation totally on the one side. On the other side, we cannot allow that people just go out there and try out if the reorganization of the taxi business works for us, right? I just don't want to find that out when I'm in this hard lab, right? Because if they do any kind of experiment, I'm not going to walk out. So there is pretty distinct, notions of that you also have in other industries, but here I think it's a fundamental thing. That it's not only about innovation. In our industry, as important to come from where we are to something better. Outcomes is the buzzword these days, meaning something more for you against the money, but also for your health. It's always also a question of regulation. And as there's so much money involved, and as it is politically so important, regulation always means national regulation. Every state takes liberty to regulate it for themselves, with slight differences. But what they all have is another fundamental principle, and that is, I would call it the cost-risk socializing. Meaning, seeing that complexity, knowing what you need beyond a little simple healthcare, no one can afford it as an individual. So we're pooling money, resources in various, again, models on national levels. Who pays if the event happens? And that means in our industry, everything is regulated for a good safety reason, but nationalized for political reason, and then paid for by someone else and those who's receiving something. So it's not a free market. The German would say it's a version of a Planwirtschaft. Or I would say in a moment we're serving 193 countries, So it's 193 incarnations of planning something. And the big word we have today, what we call that in our industry, we call that fee for service. Meaning it's not that I decide, or even the payer for me decides what he wants to pay for what I did as a medical doctor, or pay for the equipment we at Siemens give the medical doctor at hand to take the right decision when you come in there with your heart attack. There's a catalog. Saying if that kind of heart attack happens, this is worth a measurement of $233 in this 500 there. And against these reimbursement codes, medical doctors have to live up, collect as many as they can if they want to make a good salary, and we have to provide our products in there. That's a very special setup. And that setup doesn't ask for outcomes. That setup asks more for volume. So people try to define what would be outcomes, and there's a lot of thinking about. Definitely, again, cost comes into. But the more important thing is, I think, how to measure it and what would it be you're interested in. What is, and then you have these very rough categorizations as saying many more days did you live. And so in the past it was good enough for most of the cancer drugs on the market. 10 years ago it was good enough if you felt better than dying at the same period of time. Today we're saying it's so expensive, we have to ask if you not only feel better, but you also live longer. And that is kind of notion in that direction. So I would say, and I'm coming up with a few examples, innovation in our industry today is already far ahead from what we see in reality. Studies say that delta is about the first peer-reviewed paper until something, if at all, makes it into the treatment market is 17, 18 years. I think it's understandable why, but clearly I think we have to work on it to come to a different notion here and to find setups, and I think everyone has to also work on that, come up with models and advocate that we change that, because that's too slow. We want safety, for sure. We want to carefully test it. We cannot rush in there, and we will never see a cycle of 2-3 years like in the software industry. And that's good. But 17, 18 years is clearly not acceptable. So, what to do about it? And what are the examples of what really happens? That's just that in the cardiac space, I said, Jan described what next things we could really do. I'll give you just an example of what happens today. Today, this is pictures we can do from a heart, living, pumping, meanwhile in real time, and grasping the information. You don't even have to kind of take any kind of medication to show that. It's just the technology is there. And then we do all kinds of cool stuff with that. Lab piece, I'm just making an example of using these arguments. Again, we're looking into this understanding I described, understanding the proteins, understanding the DNA and everything beyond that. And we're coming up with very interesting and very helpful new ways to measure different molecule classes. So all that innovation is ongoing. Next thing, what we're actively working on, we are fusing these things, and we're working on what we call a personalized virtual heart, and we do these kind of efforts in different major disease arenas. So we're really bringing all these kinds of information on the organ level together. And so far we really have all the imaging data, all the physiology data together, and can completely simulate your heart. And now we're starting in a university hospital that we run that simulation of all the information we grasp in parallel to the operation happening. And for example, when you do electroshocks on a heart, so the patient is there with the open heart, and there's many strategies what the doctor could do to help you. And definitely this is the environment. It has to happen fast and has to happen effectively. So that's real time. What we now can do, and we do in parallel what he wants to do on the heart model. The heart model reacts to it and gives him, oh no, that wouldn't work. This one, oh, that. So he tries out in real time. We measure, and then we apply the best strategy to the heart. So that is just in testing mode, but you see where we can get. And now we're trying to use this kind of parameters, really highly influential genetic parameters and measurements, and also fuse them in there. It's much tougher, because in the world I described, it's so much more natural to us to take a picture and know a human being, and you can see a head or an upper abdomen, as we say, and to see a heart, and to bring these things together, it's much easier. While when you come from the other side of my picture and saying it's these molecules that regulate something, and we only understood parts of it, how does that really influence? But that is really where that frontier is. But we will get there, rather sooner than later, to have that information. Which brings us then to that real challenge with these kinds of technologies, and that is already today. if you think about that, I think that is that we more and more try to come from a symptom to a disease to really understand causes of multiple diseases, things like that. Let me stick with the heart model for one while I'm kind of picking that sentence. The reality is today that healthcare comes by fee-for-service just in bits and pieces. So reality is you go to your doctor and you don't feel well in your abdomen. You have pain. But if he then thinks it could be something on the oncology side, he probably sends you to an oncologist. And that one might be listening, talking, and briefly gets you into a scan. Says, I have to check, and I'm suspicious you have a tumor in your lower left lung, what have you. So you go to the radiologist. The radiologist now has that question on the table from an oncologist. So he runs an exam of your upper abdomen. 2,000 slices. Our computer makes the heart model. Our computer already shows that you have a failure on your heart, so you shouldn't be overstressed, things like that. Right? What he does today in all these systems, fee-for-service, his assistant will probably find 2 or 3 slices where you can prove that there's a tumor, and you're going to write a report to the oncologist and say, yes, and that tumor is about that size. So it's probably going to be $500, 2 or 3 lines in writing, and some giga or terabytes of data stored somewhere and deleted roughly 3 months later when they're out of storage. That you likely will not even survive the chemotherapy, which is the following next step, because of that failure of your heart, is not displayed. Doesn't happen. Because there wasn't a cardiologist asking if you were that type of guy who could survive the chemotherapy. Right? There is no path in fee-for-service. Right? There is no fee for that. There's a reliability issue. If we would kind of throw that information out, are we liable for that? Did we say that that is to you? Did you even ask for it? So I think there's many things even in that example. And we're not yet kind of monitoring or adapting knowledge to the skin or our skin and things like that. So this is really a challenge, the question, how can we organize that if the reimbursement realities, what is paid for, and the legal and other realities are really anchored on something you can describe. A single symptom, I do something for your knee, and I get a certain amount of money, which is always just this acute single event. Going then, when we wrote software to bring all these stakeholders together, was a massive failure. And that comes into Jan's first picture, saying you can connect things, yes, or why put it to the lab? Because that is when money is booked. So your treating physician gets paid for lab results and the hospital. And our software, which were able to send all the results from imaging to lab, from one to another, was a big failure. No one wanted that. Because they want to do the blood parameters and imaging again. Because that's very attractive business, that's what they make a living off. So probably fully installing our software into the reimbursement reality of today probably only crushes providers. So that is a challenge. On the other side, there is now finally forces in there, and it's really with the leading on the spending perspective system DS. They can't kind of go on with that spending rate as part of GDP as they did in the past. They had a lot of efforts, and there is now another big one running under Obama, and it's probably, hopefully in his phase as a president, he will bring it through, because there's a lot of push against it to really change that system. And what he wants to do is really find ways to pay more for outcome than fee-for-service for the single event. He wants to do that by statistically pooling people who treat you in healthcare and pay the pool for the overall. And that is, at the moment going on, that they enforce that all the stakeholders finally get connected by IT, which didn't happen in a free way. And once that happens in a couple of years, then you can really go here probably if you have then this oversight of a larger group of people over a longer period of time, then find ways to really treat more complex diseases and reimburse for that. Because if you reimburse, then change will happen. We try into that room and prepare for that and bring the various pieces together, where we bring our biomarkers, for example, another example, or our imaging, where we build the IT platform to do so, to treat chronic diseases, and to find a business model, how could we in such an outcome environment really sell and make money, and what would be the value proposition. So we're trying to experiment around that and find ways to empower it. But it also needs that the regulator goes there. And maybe added that joke. It is if Dieter has Industry 4.0, Rainer has the City 3.0, that is a glimpse of maybe there's something like a healthcare 2.0. If we ever get beyond significant amount of money beyond fee for service, that would be a game changer. 2 more slides. But there's another outcome to it, maybe. What I did here, and it was very hard to get that information. In the US healthcare system, prices for things are not transparent, so they're not publicly available like in the European system, but in Europe they are. That was an effort to get that information. It cost a couple of million to do that. But what we then mapped is all the US procedures in the healthcare system onto the average payment in Europe. And what that shows is that roughly 1/3 is just price difference. So we did a little recalculation as a few years outdated. Today you're talking roughly about $1,000 billion a year. It's just pricing delta, which goes into the intransparency of that system and the better salaries of the stakeholders. So the Obama reform is hopefully empowering over transparency that we reimburse for outcome. It could only, but also lead to just what I showed in that graph, and that means now we know where the excess cost is and just start to cut the budgets. And my personal assumption is maybe the pushback is in the US system not so much to get the poor people into the healthcare system, which is part of Obama healthcare reform. Maybe it's more on the high end. Those people who are having $1,000 billion a year at risk might well push back and say, we don't want that transparency. And if that kind of information would, like in the Sunshine Act, I don't know if you're aware of that, but the interaction with industry and medical doctors will now be published on the single ticket level, so the ticket in the Starbucks, in the internet. So you can read about any interaction between Siemens, GE, or any medical doctor, latest 5 years after the spend, down to the Starbucks, $5. If that information is gathered and put in there, that might even trigger a bigger revolution. So let's hope that all of that leads to outcome-oriented systems, which have to have IT, which bring the various stakeholders together, gain the transparency, what to spend on, and then also allow us to kind of build things which are medically more relevant to us. And that, if you're in a scanner and there's something you can see which is meaningful, is then really used. That we can build the devices Jan described, and they're really paid for because it makes sense in such a system, and not hindered by. I think it's also up to us to come up with good ideas, how to work together, but also kind of work on educating others, educating our societies where these challenges are so that we get that kind of momentum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. Really interesting, so many things you can measure now and in the future. And what you said about how long distance there actually is from innovation to market. I can't keep thinking of Ebola right now, where they're actually doing a lot of shortcuts because of they're forced to. So that's a lot of interesting things are happening right now. But anyway, I'd like you to talk again about the two keynotes you heard here. I don't know much about the technical content, but one thing I know something about is innovation. And I know if we want innovation, if we want to create new ideas, then diversity is important. And I know when you sit like this a whole day, you don't get as much diversity as you could. So I will ask you to stand up this time. So please stand up. Please stand up. And then I would ask you this time to maybe to do your talking with someone else. So maybe you can walk a little to the side, or you can turn around and talk to someone behind you. Make sure you try to talk to someone else and reflect on the two presentations you just heard. What did you find inspiring? And do you see any connections possible with what you know about what's going on? So please talk about that. You can please sit down again. And Jan and Kort, can you please come up here? So happy to see that everyone was engaged this time. I'm sure some Nobel Prize ideas are popping up in the room today. But now, thoughts, questions, possible connections that you see that you want to share with us or address for the speakers? Yeah, one. I'll give you the mic. So, yeah, I think. Okay, you just speak. You can speak loud, and maybe you just start by saying who you are and where you come from.
Fascinated by both presentation in terms of what is, let's say, how complicated the body is and the whole structure itself, and what it might be we are able in the future to predict. That brings me to the question, and a little bit also to the view in terms of more this ethic question. What we can predict might not be, let's say, from society or so forth, therefore not the best information. So, and you mentioned it, innovation, especially in that sector, is dominated by regulation. Is there any, let's say, we call it a German technique Folgenabschätzung? Is this something also that you can support?
You mean on the ethics, or of course. I mean, it's clear, but I think this goes with all technology, all new technology. You have to think it in an ethical context. It's clearly when you start manipulating with something that is close to ourselves. And I could have continued my story. I stopped it after the 20 minutes going to the cells, but there's actually possibility, and then we are working on this as well, that you can start manipulating with the cells by looking at the DNA as the computer program, and you can change that. So you can actually program bacteria and viruses to fight cancer, for instance. There's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of ethical issues that needs to be addressed. But I think this has to be also done. I mean, you can think of it as a scientist, but you also have to bring it up to a higher level. And I think one of the things that worries me at the moment is that I mean, outside the labs, people have no clue of what's going on, and it's not discussed. And if you go to the political system, I mean, they have absolutely no, and they think that whenever something comes, we can regulate. But when it's there, it may be too late to figure out how we want. So we have to, I mean, think of it at all levels, and I think that's a huge challenge.
Okay, thank you. There was one more comment.
More about the whole fact that it's of course nice that we can diagnostic so much now, even before we're actually sick. But maybe it might cause, I don't know, too many worries. I mean, even today, you can just, I don't know, take a sample of your spit, send it to Iceland or wherever they're doing, and you can get an answer of whether you'll have Alzheimer's in 50 years. And maybe these informations are not nice to have, I mean, maybe, or need to have. Maybe we'll live better without them. Is that something you're considering in regards to what diseases should you be able to detect and what should you just leave? I mean, we gotta die of something.
Another ethical question, yeah?
Sure. I think I would say there's, for me, two aspects to that. Number one, clearly the business piece is really driven around if you can do a therapy. And also the major spending of our healthcare system is into the therapy. So, for example, diagnosis against therapy goes 1 to 100. So majority of funding also goes into the therapy question, which also for us as being a diagnostic player, normally the question is, if there's no therapy, we normally don't put much effort into delivering diagnostics. So I think there's an economic thing why I think that is not an overstretched reality, I would say. The other one I would say is a genomic misconception widely spread, and that is that a lot what's going to happen to you, including your case of Alzheimer's, is imprinted in these genes. And the genes, by the way, is just 1% of what is called your genome in one of these cells which made you up. The likelihood that in your lifetime we're going to find that fingerprint of Alzheimer's, if it's there at all, in these genes, I would call is close to zero, knowing the system well. We're an evolving system. It is more like the computer program. If your SAP or whatever computer application fails, yes, in principle, someone has to program a software like SAP and design it in a way that it can fail, sure. but the majority of real failures happen when the system is up and running and someone just entered the wrong data or corrupted the structure, things like that. And the same holds true for the complex system as you are. So it's mainly failures when you're up and running. And to come from that failures to who did something wrong in the conceptualization of you as a human being in your genes, which, by the way, are only the part list of that program and not the active information, that can't happen. It's like saying if in the part list of building a skyscraper a certain kind of screws was missing, it is going to be likely that whatever happens to that building in 50 years, to take a comparison. If you ever get to that detail level, maybe in a few rare incidences, that's not the point. The point is really you're a regulated computer system. And we have to identify when things get out of control. And we learn that these cells communicate. They send themselves emails. Right? If I scratch you, you're going to start to heal. What do you think what the cells do there? Wait until you get scratched? No, you get scratched, and there's thousands of cells formatting immediately all kind of defenses for the bacteria bring in there, which was never in your body, to stop that one from killing you, and so on and so forth. We now just learned this paper, maybe you also read last week, that bacteria in your body produces antibiotica. Probably if that wouldn't exist, we wouldn't be a mankind here sitting here. So I think that is a lot going on, and that is what we have to tap and support and understand and rather strengthen the natural piece than not strengthen it. And that's why I'm personally absolutely unworried about what we can dig out of my genome, and I always use every method I can get a grip off. And guess what? The information is more like, you're too fat. Okay, I saw that one, and a little more than that. But honestly, all the methods in Iceland led to nothing so far. Nothing of real, and I predict it won't. It's so complex, or in rare cases. It's the other piece. And the other piece has a worrying element. Maybe that last comment is because our genetic system is far more interactive than we anticipated. Meaning when cells in a human being communicate, cells also do communicate across entities. So we can now show in an animal model that you manipulate your siblings actively. We can show that there is an interlink, and that makes more the question of what do we do with food, or mass industrialization of food, or minimizing the genomes of our food, and things like that. I think there's really a lot to worry, and a lot to kind of go deeper, and a lot to educate.
Thank you. I think we have no more time, though I think we all think it's really interesting, moves close to ourselves, our health, and all the things you can measure here. So let's give a hand to Jan and Kort. Thank you very much.